still don't know why I didn't answer the phone that night. At the time, it didn't feel like fear. It felt more like hesitation, like something inside me telling me to wait a second longer before reacting. I was 32, living alone in a small apartment on the second floor of an older building. Nothing fancy, quiet, predictable, the kind of place where nights usually passed without leaving a mark. It was already close to 11 when I got home. I'd stayed late at work and picked up food on the way back, so the building was mostly dark by the time I parked. I remember noticing how empty the lot looked, but I didn't think much of it. People kept different schedules. That was normal. I locked my door, set my bag down, and turned on the kitchen light. I didn't turn on anything else. I never liked having all the lights on at night. It made the apartment feel exposed. I ate standing at the counter, scrolling through my phone, half listening to the quiet hum of the building settling. That was when my phone rang. Unknown number. I stared at the screen for a few seconds. I didn't feel alarmed, just mildly annoyed. I assumed it was spam or a wrong number. It rang long enough that I considered answering just to get it over with, but something stopped me. I let it go to voicemail. The phone stopped ringing. I finished eating and rinsed my plate. I was drying my hands when the phone rang again. Same number. I frowned, suddenly more aware of how quiet the apartment was. I picked the phone up, thumb hovering over the screen, then let it ring out again. I remember thinking that if it was important, they'd leave a message. They didn't. I took my phone with me into the living room and sat on the couch. The lamp was off. The only light came from the kitchen behind me and the glow of my phone screen. A minute passed, then another. The phone buzzed with a text. "Why didn't you answer?" My stomach tightened slightly. Not panic, not yet. Just that uncomfortable shift when something doesn't fit where it should. I typed back, asking who it was. The response came almost immediately. "I was calling you." I stared at the message longer than necessary. I told myself it was someone confused. Someone who had the wrong number but didn't realize it yet. I typed that they had the wrong person. "No, I don't." I felt a chill run through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. I locked my phone and sat there, listening. The apartment was silent. No footsteps in the hallway. No doors opening or closing. Everything felt exactly the same as it had before the phone rang. The phone buzzed again. "You're home." I stood up so suddenly the couch creaked beneath me. I told myself not to overreact. They could be guessing. People guess things all the time. I typed that they needed to stop messaging me. There was a pause this time, long enough for my heart to start beating faster. "I heard you come in." That was the moment the space around me changed. The apartment felt smaller, tighter, like the walls had moved in without me noticing. I walked to the front door and checked the lock, even though I knew I'd locked it. It was secure. I checked the deadbolt. Still locked. I didn't respond. The phone buzzed again. "You don't usually get home this late." I sat back down slowly, my phone heavy in my hand. I tried to think of a rational explanation. A neighbor, someone in the building, someone who had mistaken me for someone else. But the details felt too specific, too casually accurate. I typed one word. "Stop." Another pause. I just wanted to talk. I felt my throat tighten. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. I turned off the kitchen light, leaving the apartment in near darkness. I don't know why I did that. Maybe I wanted to feel less visible. Maybe I didn't want whoever was texting to imagine me sitting there, lit up and exposed. The phone buzzed. "You turned the light off." I froze. My eyes moved instinctively to the front door, then to the window, though the blinds were closed. I hadn't mentioned the light. I hadn't moved loudly. I whispered out loud, "That's not possible," even though I knew how thin the walls were. Another message appeared. "I don't like it when you ignore me." My hand started shaking. I stood up and walked into the bedroom, closing the door behind me quietly. I locked it, something I'd never done before. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone clutched in both hands, trying to slow my breathing. I typed that I was calling the police. "You can," the reply came. "I'll wait." I stared at that message for a long time. My finger hovered over the emergency call button. I didn't know what to say if I called. I didn't know how to explain what was happening without sounding ridiculous. All I had were texts. No proof, no voice, no face. The phone rang again. Same number. This time, I watched it ring until it stopped. I didn't answer. I didn't decline. I just let it ring in my hand, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure someone else could hear it. A final message came through. I know you're awake." I sat there in the dark, every sense sharpened, listening for any sound that didn't belong. I told myself over and over that it was just a phone, just messages, just words on a screen. But deep down, I knew something had changed the moment I chose not to answer. And whatever was on the other end of that phone call wasn't finished yet. I don't remember how long I sat there after that last message. Time felt stretched, uneven. I kept my phone in my hand, screen dimmed, afraid that if I set it down I'd miss something important, or worse, that I'd stop paying attention. I listened to the apartment in a way I never had before, noticing the soft clicks of the building settling, the distant sound of a car passing somewhere outside, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Every noise made my shoulders tense. I finally called emergency services. I didn't know what else to do. I told the operator that someone was texting me and seemed to know things about my routine. I tried to explain without exaggerating, careful not to sound hysterical. She asked if I could see anyone. I said no. She asked if I heard anything unusual. I hesitated, then said I wasn't sure. She told me officers would come check the area and asked me to stay inside. While I was on the call, my phone buzzed again. I didn't look at it right away. I waited until the operator finished speaking, then glanced down. "You shouldn't have done that." I didn't tell the operator about the message. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to admit how bad it was getting. I stayed on the line until I heard sirens outside. Faint at first, then closer. The sound brought a wave of relief, so sudden it made my legs feel weak. By the time the officers knocked, the messages had stopped. They checked the hallway, the stairwell, the parking lot. Nothing. No one suspicious. No reports of anyone matching what little description I could give. One of them asked if I recognized the number. I didn't. Another suggested it could be a prank or a wrong number that escalated. They told me to block the number and call again if anything else happened. After they left, the apartment felt emptier than before. I blocked the number, turned on every light, and didn't sleep much. Every time my phone buzzed with a notification, my heart jumped. Nothing else came through that night. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was over. In the light of morning, everything felt less threatening. I went to work, told a coworker I hadn't slept well, and kept the details to myself. I didn't want to explain something that still didn't fully make sense to me. That evening, I got home earlier than usual. I left the lights on. I cooked dinner, put on the TV, tried to make the apartment feel normal again. For a few hours, it almost worked. I checked my phone constantly, half expecting another message, but the screen stayed quiet. Just after 10, I started to relax. I remember thinking that maybe ignoring the calls had been the right choice, that whoever it was had moved on. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "You blocked me." My stomach dropped. I stared at the message, my mind racing. I hadn't given my number to anyone new. I hadn't posted it anywhere. I typed back, telling them to stop contacting me. The reply came slower this time. "I didn't want to scare you." I locked my bedroom door and sat on the bed, phone in my hand, trying to keep my breathing steady. I typed that I was calling the police again. "I know," the message said. "You did last time." That was when it really sank in. That this wasn't random. They remembered. They were paying attention. I called emergency services again, my voice steadier than I felt, and explained that the messages had resumed from a different number. The operator told me officers were on the way. While I waited, I heard a sound outside my apartment door. Not knocking, just movement in the hallway. Soft footsteps passing, then stopping. I held my breath, listening. My phone buzzed again. "You don't need to hide." I whispered everything to the operator, telling her I thought someone was outside my door. She told me to stay inside, stay quiet. I heard the footsteps move again, this time retreating toward the stairs. Sirens approached not long after. By the time the officers arrived, the hallway was empty. They checked the cameras in the building, but nothing useful showed up. No clear faces, no one lingering, just shadows and passing shapes. That night, I didn't stay in my apartment. I packed a bag and stayed with a friend. I told her some of it, enough to justify why I needed a place to sleep. Over the next week, I changed my number. I adjusted my routine. I stopped coming home at the same time every night. Nothing else happened after that. No more calls, no more messages. Even now, I still think about that first choice, the moment I watched the phone ring and decided not to answer. I don't know if things would have been different if I had picked up. I don't know if it would have ended sooner or gotten worse. What I do know is that being alone at night felt different after that, like silence wasn't neutral anymore. Sometimes, when my phone rings from an unknown number, I still let it ring. Not because I'm afraid to answer, but because I've learned that ignoring something can change the direction of a night in ways you don't understand until much later. I didn't notice how quiet the house felt until after midnight. Not the normal kind of quiet, where everything is simply asleep, but the kind that makes you aware of your own movements. I was 36 at the time, living alone in a small house at the edge of a residential area. It wasn't isolated exactly, but it backed up to a stretch of undeveloped land that most people ignored. During the day, it felt peaceful. At night, it felt larger than it should have. That evening had been ordinary. I came home around 7, cooked dinner, watched television, and cleaned up. I remember checking the locks before settling in. Something I did every night without thinking. Front door, back door, windows, everything was secure. By 10, I turned most of the lights off, leaving just the lamp in the living room and the hallway light on. I wasn't tired yet, just enjoying the calm. Around 11:30, I muted the TV because I thought I heard something outside. At first, I wasn't sure what it was, just a soft sound, like gravel shifting. I sat still, listening. Nothing followed. I told myself it was an animal or a neighbor coming home late. The explanation felt reasonable enough that I turned the TV back on. 10 minutes later, it happened again, this time closer. A faint scraping sound near the side of the house. I turned the TV off completely and stood up. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. I walked slowly toward the hallway, careful not to make noise, and listened. My phone buzzed in my hand, startling me. Unknown number. You hear it too. My stomach tightened. I stared at the screen, my heart beginning to race. I hadn't said anything out loud. I hadn't texted anyone. I typed back, asking who it was, then immediately regretted engaging. You live alone, the reply came. I locked my phone and stood there, listening to the house. The sound came again. Unmistakable now. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Moving along the side of the house, where the windows didn't face the street. My phone buzzed again. You always turn the TV down when you're nervous. That was when fear started to settle in. Not panic yet, but a sharp awareness that something wasn't right. I walked to the front door and checked the lock again. Locked. Deadbolt secure. I checked the back door. Still locked. Everything was as it should be. I didn't respond to the messages. The phone buzzed again. You don't have to answer. I went into my bedroom and closed the door quietly, locking it behind me. I sat on the bed, phone in my hands, trying to slow my breathing. I told myself this could still be someone guessing, someone trying to scare me. But the timing felt too precise. The details too specific. Outside, the footsteps stopped. I held my breath, listening. Seconds passed. Then I heard a soft knock, not at the front door, somewhere else, closer. The sound was gentle, almost polite. My phone buzzed. I didn't want to use the door. I whispered out loud that this wasn't happening, even as my heart pounded. I dialed emergency services, my fingers shaking, and told the operator someone was outside my house and messaging me. She asked if I could see them. I said no. She asked if I heard anything now. I told her about the knock. The operator told me officers were on the way and to stay where I was. While I was on the call, the footsteps started again. They moved slowly around the house, pausing beneath windows, then continuing on. I imagined someone standing just outside, listening the same way I was, waiting for something. My phone buzzed again. You should stay in there. Tears welled up in my eyes. I didn't respond. I whispered everything to the operator, describing the sounds, the messages, the fear that was starting to overwhelm me. She kept me talking, grounding me, telling me help was coming. Then, suddenly, the footsteps moved away. Faster this time. I heard movement near the back of the house. Then nothing. The silence that followed was almost worse. When the police arrived, they searched the yard and the surrounding area. They found disturbed gravel along the side of the house and fresh footprints near one of the windows, but no one was there. One officer told me quietly that it looked like someone had been walking around the property, watching. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with every light on, phone in my hand, listening. The messages stopped. No more knocks, no more sounds. But what stayed with me wasn't just the fear of that night. It was the realization that someone knew my habits well enough to predict how I'd react. That someone had been close enough to hear the smallest changes in my routine. At the time, I told myself it was over, that once the police had been involved, whoever it was would move on. Looking back now, I know that night was only the beginning. I stayed awake until the sun came up, sitting on the couch with every light on, listening to the house breathe. The officers had left after checking the perimeter and taking notes, telling me to call again if anything else happened. They tried to sound reassuring, but there was a look one of them gave me as he stepped outside that I couldn't forget. It wasn't panic, it was concern, like he'd seen something similar before. In the morning, the house looked harmless again. The yard was empty. The side of the house where the footprints had been was just gravel and siding, nothing out of place unless you knew where to look. In daylight, it was easy to convince myself that fear had exaggerated everything. I told myself it could have been a prank, someone bored, someone who would disappear once they realized I'd called the police. I took the day off work and stayed home, partly because I was exhausted and partly because the idea of leaving the house empty made my chest tighten. I walked the perimeter slowly, checking windows, checking the fence line, checking places I'd never paid attention to before. Near the side window, I noticed faint scuff marks in the gravel that hadn't been there before. They weren't dramatic, just enough to suggest someone had stood there for a while. That detail stayed with me. By afternoon, I started changing small things. I moved a chair in front of the back door. I closed blinds I usually left open. I kept my phone volume turned all the way up. I told myself these were temporary precautions, just until my nerves settled. That evening, I stayed home again. I didn't want to, but I didn't want to feel like I was running either. I left the TV on louder than usual and kept the hallway light on. I checked my phone constantly, half expecting another message. Nothing came. By 10, I started to relax. At around 10:30, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. You stayed home today. My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, my hands cold. I hadn't told anyone. I hadn't posted anything. I typed that they needed to stop contacting me. The response came slower than before. I wanted to see if you would. I felt sick. I locked my bedroom door and sat on the bed, phone clutched in my hand, trying to breathe steadily. I typed that I was calling the police again. You already did, the message replied. It didn't change much. Outside, I heard movement near the side of the house. Soft, careful. My phone buzzed again. You fixed the chair. That was when it really sank in that this person wasn't guessing. They were watching. Not just the house, but me. My choices. My attempts to feel safe. I called emergency services again, my voice shaking as I explained that the messages had resumed from a different number and that someone might be outside. The operator stayed on the line with me, asking what I could hear. I told her about the movement, about the messages. She told me officers were on the way and to stay inside. The footsteps outside moved slowly, circling the house the way they had the night before. They stopped near the back door. I heard someone test the handle gently, like they didn't want to make noise. My phone buzzed. You always lock it at night. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from crying. I whispered everything to the operator, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The footsteps moved away from the door, pausing beneath a window, then continuing on. You should stay where you are, the next message read. Then, suddenly, sirens. Distant at first, then closer. Outside, the footsteps sped up, no longer careful. I heard gravel crunch as someone ran. The back gate slammed hard enough to rattle the fence. When the police arrived, they found the gate open and fresh footprints leading away from the house. No one was caught. One officer told me quietly that it looked like someone had been testing how I reacted, learning my habits. That sentence stuck with me. That night, I didn't stay in the house. I packed a bag and stayed with a friend. I told her enough of the story to justify why I needed a place to sleep. Over the next week, I made decisions I hadn't planned on making so quickly. I installed cameras. I changed my phone number. I started coming home at different times each night. For a while, nothing happened. The fear dulled into something manageable. I started sleeping again. I told myself it was finally over. Then, about a month later, I got a message from an unknown number. You changed your routine. I blocked the number immediately. No reply came. Nothing else happened after that. I moved not long after. New place, more neighbors, less open space around the house. I told myself it was for convenience, but deep down, I knew why I couldn't stay. Even now, I still notice the quiet after midnight. I still listen for sounds that don't belong, because the most unsettling part wasn't that someone walked around my house. It was knowing how easily they learned when I was alone. I didn't notice the silence right away. It crept in slowly, the kind you don't recognize until it feels heavier than it should. I was 33 at the time, living alone in a small townhouse at the end of a short row. It wasn't isolated, but at night it felt separated from everything else, like the street stopped paying attention after a certain hour. That night, I came home just before 10, tired but calm, expecting nothing more than a quiet evening. I locked the door behind me, kicked off my shoes, and turned on the lamp near the couch. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. I never liked how exposed they made the place feel. I heated up food, ate slowly, and scrolled through my phone while the TV played quietly in the background. Everything felt normal enough that I didn't question it. It wasn't until I muted the TV that I realized how still everything was. No cars passing, no voices, not even the usual distant noise from the main road a few blocks away. I sat there for a moment, listening, telling myself I was just paying more attention because I was alone. I stood up to throw my plate away and glanced out the front window without really thinking. That's when I saw the figure. At first, I thought it was just a shadow. The porch light from the house across the street cast odd shapes sometimes, and my eyes weren't fully adjusted to the dark. I leaned closer to the glass. The shape didn't move. It stood near the sidewalk, just beyond the reach of the light, too solid to be a trick of shadows. I stepped back, my heart starting to beat faster. I told myself it could be a neighbor, someone waiting for a ride, someone on their phone. The explanation felt thin, but I clung to it anyway. I turned the lamp off, suddenly aware of how visible I must have been from outside. My phone buzzed in my hand, making me jump. Unknown number. You don't usually turn that off so early. My stomach tightened. I stared at the message, my mind racing. I hadn't said anything. I hadn't posted anything. I typed back, asking who it was, then immediately wished I hadn't. The reply came quickly. I didn't want to startle you. I locked my phone and stood there in the dark, listening to my own breathing. I glanced back at the window, but didn't step closer this time. I didn't want to confirm what I was afraid of seeing. The phone buzzed again. You saw me. I whispered no under my breath, even though I knew no one could hear me. I walked toward the front door and checked the lock, even though I remembered locking it when I came in. It was secure. I checked the deadbolts. Still locked. Another message came through. You always check twice. My hand started shaking. I hadn't told anyone that. I hadn't made enough noise for someone outside to hear me. I moved down the hallway and locked my bedroom door, something I'd never done before. I sat on the bed, phone clutched in both hands, trying to think clearly. Outside, I heard movement, slow footsteps on pavement, then they stopped. My phone buzzed. I'm not coming closer. That sentence scared me more than anything else. It implied a choice, a decision being made. I dialed emergency services, my voice barely above a whisper when the operator answered. I told her someone was outside my house and messaging me. She asked if I could see them. I said I didn't want to look. She told me officers were on the way and to stay inside. While I was on the call, the footsteps started again. They moved slowly, then stopped directly in front of my house. I could hear someone breathing, faint but steady, just on the other side of the door. My phone buzzed again. You don't need to hide. I slid down onto the floor, my back against the bed, tears filling my eyes. I whispered everything to the operator, describing the messages, the sounds, the fear that was tightening in my chest. She kept me talking, grounding me, telling me help was close. The footsteps didn't move. Whoever it was stayed there, not knocking, not trying the handle, just standing in the dark, waiting. I don't know how long it was before I heard sirens. At first they were distant, then closer. Outside, the footsteps finally moved, quick and careless now. I heard them retreat down the sidewalk, then nothing. By the time the police arrived, the street was empty. They searched the area but didn't find anyone. One of the officers asked if I recognized the number. I didn't. Another told me it was good that I hadn't gone outside. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the bed with every light on, replaying the messages in my head over and over. What stayed with me wasn't just the fear of that moment. It was the way whoever it was knew when to stop moving, like they were waiting for something I didn't understand yet. I stayed awake until morning, sitting on the edge of the bed with every light on, listening to the house as if it might suddenly explain itself. The officers had left after checking the street and nearby yards, telling me to call again if anything else happens. They tried to sound reassuring, but there was a careful tone in their voices that made it clear they didn't have answers either. When daylight finally came, the fear dulled into something heavier and more confusing. The street looked ordinary again. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been there at all. I took the day off work and didn't leave the house. I kept replaying the messages in my head, trying to find a pattern, something that would make it all make sense. I walked from room to room, checking windows and locks, noticing how many blind spots there were that I'd never thought about before. In the afternoon, I convinced myself that maybe it had been someone passing through, someone who'd noticed me by chance and moved on. I wanted to believe that. That evening, I tried to do everything differently. I parked in the small garage behind the house instead of on the street. I closed the blinds before it got dark. I left multiple lights on and turned the TV up louder than usual. I wanted the place to feel occupied, unpredictable. For a few hours, it almost worked. Nothing happened. No messages, no sounds. By 10, I started to relax. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. You parked inside tonight. My chest tightened. I stared at the screen, my hands cold. I hadn't told anyone. I typed back, telling them to leave me alone. The reply came slower this time. I told you, I don't need to be close. I locked my bedroom door and sat on the bed, phone in my hand, trying to breathe steadily. I told myself that words couldn't hurt me, that whoever this was couldn't actually do anything as long as the doors were locked. Another message appeared. You're watching the windows now. I turned away from the window immediately, then hated myself for reacting. My phone buzzed again. That's okay. I called emergency services again, my voice steadier than I felt, and told the operator the same person had contacted me and seemed to know changes I'd made. She told me officers were on the way and to stay inside. Outside, I heard a sound that made my stomach drop, a car pulling up. I moved carefully to the bedroom window and peeked through the curtain just enough to see. A dark car was parked across the street, headlights off, engine running quietly. My phone buzzed. I didn't want to rush. I backed away from the window and sat on the floor, my knees pulled to my chest. The operator stayed on the line, asking what I could hear. The engine shut off. A door opened, then closed softly. Footsteps crossed the street, slow and deliberate. Another message appeared. You should stay where you are. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from crying. The footsteps reached my driveway and stopped. I listened as someone stood there, not knocking, not trying the handle, just waiting. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Red and blue lights suddenly flashed through the gaps in the blinds. Sirens cut through the silence. Outside, the footsteps ran, fast and careless now. The car door slammed and the engine roared to life as it sped away. When the police arrived, they searched the area again. They found tire marks near the curb and footprints leading back toward the street. No one was caught. One of the officers told me quietly that it seemed like someone had been watching my routines, learning when I was most likely to be alone. I didn't stay there much longer. I packed a bag and stayed with a friend for a few nights. Within a week, I moved. Different neighborhood, secured parking, cameras. I changed my number and told only a few people where I lived. For a while, nothing happened. The fear faded into something manageable. I started to sleep again. I told myself it was finally over. Months later, as I was leaving work one evening, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. You chose better this time. I blocked it immediately. Nothing else followed. Even now, I still notice when someone stands too still outside at night. I still pay attention to parked cars that don't leave right away. Because the most unsettling part wasn't that someone came close. It was knowing they were patient enough to wait and careful enough to leave when they decided it wasn't the right moment.